Sepang was horrific for Aprilia. I mean, it was, I don't know, I think Massimo Ribola must have been having a few extra whiskies at the bar, I think, after the first day. But, Buriram was slightly cheerier. I mean, Ralph Fernandez had surgery and was able to get straight back on the Trackhouse RSGP. And then, of course, Marco Bezzecchi just looked like he got really into the groove with the kind of idiosyncrasies of this particular Italian motorcycle. So the big question is, do we see Marco winning a race this year based on what he was able to show in Thailand? I think it's looking pretty good.
My contrarian view is that actually what happened at Sepang was really good for Aprilia because it put an awful lot of responsibility onto the shoulders of Marco Bezzecchi, and Bezzecchi really, really stepped up. Like, he was just really impressive. He got through all of his work. Savadori obviously sort of like stepped in to do a lot of the bulk. But Bezzecchi really stepped up. He took on that responsibility. It gave him a huge amount of self-confidence, which I think was one of the things that he was missing. And he's just really quick. He was really confident. He was really calm. You could tell also in his body language even by the end of the Sepang test, he was more confident. He was, stronger. He was more sort of, he was standing up straighter. He grew a couple of centimeters. It was very impressive. So, it was a huge loss losing Martin. But I think Martin, you don't have to worry about Martin's confidence. Martin, he's a world champion. He believes in himself. He's going to be fine once he gets back up. He's going to regret having missed those first few weeks of test, that bit of testing. It's going to take him 3 or 4 rounds to actually get his head around this 2025 Aprilia. But I think the step forward which Marco Bezzecchi made was so big that it more than compensates the loss of the loss of Martin. So I'm quite optimistic for Aprilia in general. And also the bike just looked really good. You saw how fast Ayogura was. So I'm quite optimistic about Aprilia in general, and especially about Bezzecchi. I think this has been really, really good for Bezzecchi.
I'm not going to say that this wasn't good for Bezzecchi, but this overcompensates for the lack of Martin. I think that's maybe going slightly far, Dave. I mean, would Aprilia have accepted this situation at the start of preseason, that their prized fighter, the guy that they've broken the bank to prize away from Ducati, would miss all of preseason? And, let's face it, will have a pretty steady start to the year as he gradually comes up to speed on the RSGP and still is far from being physically fit. I'm not exactly sure that Massimo Rivola would have shook your hand on that and said, yes, we have a deal, matey boy.
No, but I mean, they came out of it looking a lot better than you would expect. Like we all thought when after Martin sort of, managed to break himself, that was it. That was the end of Aprilia's hopes. But I think that is completely wrong. I think they've come out of it looking a lot better than we expected.
What, so you're saying we jumped the gun and we got in way ahead of ourselves?
Oh, surely not. Journalists drawing premature conclusions on only partial data. It's unheard of.
It is, yeah. That being said, I was very pleasantly surprised. I mean, Bezzecchi probably was, I think, along with Joan Mir, the biggest surprise of the test in some respects, because this has been a terrible track for Aprilia in years gone by. They've had terrible times in Buriram. I think they had a decent wet race last year, but had it not been for the rain, probably would have been an absolute nightmare for Aleix and Maverick. Bezzecchi does like this track. This is the place where he scored the first pole position of his MotoGP career, so there is that. But considering we have heard so much about the Aprilia being really weak in heavy braking areas, Buriram does have lots and lots of those. It was a pleasant surprise, and Bezzecchi finishing third was great, and that's despite him saying that he still feels some way off it in time attack mode. There was also the very encouraging sign of his sprint simulation on the final day, which of the riders that did sprint simulations was the fastest by quite some distance. I think he was maybe around 0.3 of a second on average per lap faster than the next best, which was Joan Mir. So, really great test for Bezzecchi. As Dave said, he seemed to grow in stature by 1 or 2 centimeters and really reveled in the added responsibility. He said that he was pretty nervous after what happened to Jorge in Sepang. He said the team were as well. They were really down. But the added trust that they gave him, definitely looked as though it worked out. And, still a lot of question marks, I think, for Aprilia going into this year. The fact that they will have not really had Martin's input for most of this, well, in fact, all of testing this year. That's a big concern. But yeah, there is a sign that the bike has taken a considerable step forward.
I mean, Bezzecchi was the rising star of MotoGP in 2023, wasn't he? And he was kind of usurped a little bit by Pedro Acosta last year, but then last year was terrible for him. I mean, he couldn't manage race situations. He couldn't get his head around trying to set up the GP23 at all. And it was just one big struggle. And I think his reputation or his potential took a bit of a hit. So he was in a pretty decent situation with Aprilia coming in, with them signing Jorge Martin, him being a little bit kind of like, I don't want to say a B-list rider, but he definitely didn't have as much of the spotlight as the Spaniard.
100%.
And now I think, this has been a pretty positive start to what is a little bit of a reinvention for him. If he had been 12th, 11th, 10th in the timesheets and not really showing any spark, then you could kind of keep temper and expectations. But now I think we can go back to almost that 2023 hype, if you like, or hyperbole, and think, okay, this could be the rival of his kind of talent again.
It's just one test, Ad. It's just one test.
Oh, come on now. I have to pad out the podcast somehow. Blimey.
2 tests. No, thank you, Ad. I completely agree. You're completely right.
Oh, blimey. We're in agreement already. Feels like a new year and a new season.